Well, Israel is ramping up its military offensive in Gaza. The Hamas-run Ministry of Health says that at least 60 people were killed by Israeli airstrikes in the war-torn territory within a 24-hour period. This is Israel faces mounting pressure to let more aid into Gaza after a nearly 3-month blockade into the Strip. Some aid trucks have been allowed to enter the territory, but just today, the World Food Program said 15 of its trucks were looted late last night in southern Gaza. ABC News foreign correspondent Tom Sufi-Burridge following the latest for us.
Yeah, Morgan, 83 trucks, Israel says, got into Gaza today, 107 yesterday, but aid agencies and the UN say that is a drop in the bucket. It's nowhere near what is needed after weeks and weeks of that blockade when nothing at all was allowed into the Gaza Strip. Now, the head of the UN tonight is saying that the entire population is, quote, facing the risk of famine. Antonio Guterres going on to say families are being starved and denied the very basics. Israeli officials continue to push back on that. They claim no one is starving in Gaza right now, and they say Israel does not want to see people starving, and that is why they say Israel is letting a limited amount of aid in now and will allow more aid in the coming days. But we're not just seeing a war of words over the scale of the humanitarian picture on the ground amid the escalation of military operations by Israel in Gaza. We're also seeing a war of words between Israel and its key allies after key allies like France, the UK, Canada strongly condemned the blockade on Gaza and also Israel's continuing and escalating war on the ground. And then those two Israeli embassy staffers were shot dead in Washington, D.C. The Israeli government has said that shooting came about after a rise in anti-Semitism and has basically made a clear link and said the condemnation by its allies of the war contributed to that rising sense of anti-Semitism. Now, you know, that link between the shooting dead of those two Israeli embassy staffers and the condemnation from key allies of the war, many people here in Europe have strongly rejected that link. The French government saying that is a ridiculous claim to make. And they are arguing, many people here in Europe, that it is not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel's war and the blockade on Gaza. Now, all eyes, I think, now go on Monday. That is when Israel says it will launch this controversial plan to distribute aid just from specific zones of Gaza using American companies, and people getting access to aid will have to be vetted before they can get access to that aid. Now, Israel says it needs to do that to stop aid getting into the hands of Hamas, but aid agencies and the UN have said they will not participate in that program because they say it runs contrary to basic principles of the distribution of humanitarian aid. And the big question is whether or not that scheme can succeed and whether it can be scaled up without the participation of the United Nations and other major aid agencies. Morgan?
Well, Tom, certainly that aid is desperately needed. Tom Sufi-Burridge, thank you.